So I'd like to make a little record of how I've been using the smartboard and the whiteboard, the white wall, in my classroom for teaching in the social media, digitally engaged and literate classroom. So first of all, I think it always has to start with the personal. I don't even start with the smartboard on, but I start with having a conversation with the students because I want them to understand and just kind of regroup in this space as a learning space. I then come to build it up, come to the whiteboard. Today we're looking at food kiosks, and so I'm going to use this over and over because we like this character. We call him Chronic Poverty Kevin, and he came out of last week's exploration into the 3 T's. 3 T's are talent, tech, and technology. And we looked at that, we introduced that last week through the article in The Economist, Left in the Lurch, which said that in order to survive in the modern world, in the modern economy, towns need to digitize and globalize. It was in a different order in the article. And so they saw directly last week the link between the theory and how this looks in the media world now, how these ideas are discussed. And so, of course, they had the students access the article on their phones, and then of course we read portions of the article out loud together. You know, that ritual of reciting and recitation, that we can hear each other's voice thinking and talking critically about ideas. So one of the ways we looked at it was, how would someone born into one of those dying towns get out of this? How would someone born out in one of those dying towns get to what Bell Hooks calls the good life? What The Economist was saying, those cities need to develop in order to provide the good life for its citizens. And Richard Florida is saying you need talent, tech, and tolerance in order to fulfill, to help people who work in the knowledge economy feel self-fulfilled, self-actualized. And so his theory looks at exactly what are the hierarchy of needs for people working in the knowledge economy, and certainly that's very different from what we had in the industrialized economy when even such theories were developed. And so the students will in background have looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs as compared to how Hertzberg's two-factor theory relates to these needs in the workplace. And so they see that satisfaction and dissatisfaction, for example, are related to meeting one's needs, and particularly the higher order needs, and how those are met in the workplace or rewarded in the workplace. And I can quickly review those in the classroom by drawing this on the board. And so because we've looked at the hierarchy of needs in terms of work in the workplace, one of those factors for satisfaction or dissatisfaction are leadership styles. And again, Richard Florida is pointing to the fact that we need to lead in the knowledge economy differently because we need to be more people focused. That's ultimately what this is saying, is we can't think in such a compartmentalized way about creative ways to solve this problem, about creative ways to not just link people like Chronic Poverty Kevin over there to the good life that he wants, you know, a good job, a good home, to be self-actualized, to be self-fulfilled. But we also are able to say, well, what's the role then? What links those? And that is, of course, different forms of government, linking opportunities. Because if, again, Kevin's looking for opportunity. Last week a few weeks ago, we talked about social media and how Kevin could use social media to access those different opportunities. This week, we're specifically looking at this through the example of a campus food kiosk. And so we introduced this week by first introducing, again, Chronic Poverty Kevin. We know who he is. And we explored, okay, so if the university is supposed to supply Kevin with good food in order to meet his needs, then first of all, we explored what are Kevin's needs, you know. In his work, there's a lot of thinking, so we explored that as well. And what does this mean, thinking food? And the students brainstormed about that and came up with these ideas. And then the students also listed all of the different food outlets, all the different places that you could get food on campus. And you see the circles here because I put them in groups for them to go out to explore and critique each of the food outlets in terms of how they're meeting Chronic Poverty Kevin's needs or not. What's interesting about this is in brainstorming it, you see cooking is at the top and is quite displaced because the students hadn't thought of that until they were really prompted to think, well, actually, how can Kevin cook? Because that's what many of us would do. And I raised that issue with asking one of the Chinese students I knew who, through their own experience of displacement, as many of the students are, they've had to develop this cooking, especially because they really relate it to their ability to access this opportunity, because cooking, they understand, for them also feeds a sense of nostalgia and self-actualization. So again, continually creating those links between the theory and the practice for them. And so then I asked them, well, what helps or enhances Kevin's cooking? We briefly mentioned, they said Asda and Waitrose, which of course are easily accessible on the buses here, on the free bus system here. And we talked about the differences between those and those models, because in the interim, in talking about cooking on campus, I shared with them how I did my first year in OSCA. And there's a video that I referenced to the students on the Nile site about this experience, but I briefly shared with them how I ate within my first year of university, chips and hot sauce. But then I joined a cooperative, and it allowed me to cook and develop a whole different set of skills. And I explained to them how it created value through interconnecting students on campus. And so one of the examples that even came out of this is that, many of us as students who come to campus from working class families, we also have to shift our diets, because the one that our families gave to us, the traditional foods, may be enriching for a more physically active kind of lifestyle, but it's certainly not one that fits the knowledge economy. And so one of the students mentioned that you learn to cook on YouTube. And then I gave my story about learning to cook and how I integrate different foods. And I was very specific, because this week is Thanksgiving, so they could understand that we're thinking about traditional foods, but how I've used travel to enhance and explore those, and even use food to expose my family, to interconnect them to the world. And so they seeing that my family, even, especially the young people, and I told them that I come from a working class family, it's not like chronic poverty Kevin, but nonetheless, we're still struggling to interconnect the young people in our family in ways to the world that they understand how they can escape chronic poverty. And so this was all brought together pretty neatly. What we haven't done yet, and what's in the background, because we've done a lot on this, is I put these kinds of questions on the board to prompt them further. Now, when they broke into groups, this is key, because now we think about how the students have different roles. I gave them a task, and I introduced that all along, right? Even if Kevin's job here is to think, then Edward de Bono gave us a way to think critically, the ways of thinking about thinking as labor. And so in the groups, they each adopt one of these hats. I put them into groups. I insist that one of the hats also be the blue hat, the one who keeps them onto process and keeps them going. And so in that respect, I always call the group, the group leader up. And I say, okay, so, you guys are given the task to keep the group on task, be back here at this time, synchronize your watches, and that sort of thing. They also, because that validates them as a leader in that group, and it may not be the person who would have been expected. For example, the oldest person I did in this group was one of the Chinese students who would have been more reticent to speak up in general, but now he's given a permission and a role and a function within the group. Equally, what you're seeing here on the smart board, I had one of the students that I have discussed in one-to-one with about his assignment. I had him be my smart board operator for this task. And so as we went through all the different tools, the Maslow's, the Hertzbergs, the de Bono thinking, I could even reference back to the article that we looked at, and they see how everything ties in, or even the readings on Nile. They also see that their peers are enabled to do this on the smart board, and they get to see those skills in action. Here are some of my students coming back now. Yes.